at Orrick this morning, and I just want to thank the team at Orrick for putting this together and applying, its incredible historic leadership as a law firm to the task on artificial intelligence, which is everybody's key subject these days. So thank you. And I think Jeremy and team, Shannon, we're going to have a great conversation this morning featuring some incredible experts on the subject, and hopefully get some questions answered and stir up some new ones. So just I'll give you a little background. This is Orrick is a firm that was founded way back in the 1860s. Back in my time in San Francisco city government, I thought of Orrick as being the go-to place whenever we were building infrastructure to handle all the bonds and do all that kind of stuff, which Orrick does, but they do an awful lot more than that. So they're involved in innovation, technology, energy, as well as infrastructure, finance, life sciences, and health tech, and do certainly one of the top law firms in America. Advise on transactions, litigation, and regulatory. So I'm doing your job for you, Chairman. And regulatory matters for venture-backed companies, public companies, investment funds, financial institutions, and government. And they have been taking a huge role in AI. And my friend Vincent Thomas, who has dedicated his life to making New York and California kind of into one big fighting machine, which is a pretty interesting nuance. And we've been working with him on this. Orrick is a firm that's in both of those places and other places, and suggested, a Bay Area Council, Silicon Valley Leadership Group coming together. Speaking of Bay Area Council and Silicon Valley Leadership Group coming together, you might know that that's what we're trying to do, is come together. So this is a good example of us doing that. And, it doesn't, Jeremy was saying to me, maybe he'll say to you, but I'll beat him to the punch, that he went to the 49er game last night and couldn't believe, as a New Yorker, the billboards lining the freeway, with every single billboard being AI, 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 and not seeing the billboards in New York doing the same thing. And so this is something even locally I notice all the time, and it's just really impactful, to go down the 101 and just see that, what we were saying before all this really, really happened, or you couldn't see it, that we would have this confluence of power in this field that's the leading field and kind of the biggest question mark going forward. So there's obviously a lot on the table. We've got a major bill sitting on the governor's desk, Senator Wiener's Bill 1047. A lot of stuff to be adjudicated, and it's still a field that's nascent. So much is going on, but there's so many questions to be answered. And I just, Jeremy is an absolute leader in this field. As one senior executive put it, Jeremy and his team are the apex predators of state government affairs practices. You don't just want them on your side when you need to pass, kill, or shape a bill in one or more state legislatures. You have to have Jeremy and his team on his side, and he's done some amazing things. So I'm going to let him take it away and introduce the panel, and I hope we'll have a great conversation today and understand a little bit more about what's happening in the AI field, and how organizations like Bay Area Council and Silicon Valley Leadership Group, who represent these companies but represent the entire business community, what can we do as a community in this incredible region to make sure that our leadership just only grows, and we're able to give something to our region, our state, our country, and the world that's even greater than all the inputs. So with that, I turn it over to Mr. Kudan. Thank you, and we'll listen carefully.
Let me see. I'll see if this works. I rarely need a microphone because apparently as my kids tell me, I talk very loudly. But thank you, Jim. That was amazing. I'm going to have Jim introduce me everywhere going forward. And thank you for reading that quote that was embarrassing that I tried to take off, but it was a real quote. I appreciate it. I got to tell you, and it's also a true story. I was stunned driving back from Santa Clara, which they, mistakenly called them the San Francisco 49ers. So I assumed it was a much closer journey to last night's game than it turned out to be. But kudos to whoever got that. That might be the Silicon Valley Leadership Group was the behind the Santa Clara location. But what I was going to say is that I was stunned by the billboards, and just every single billboard, and you see it in the city as well, and here has AI, something with AI. It's just not something you see in any other city in the United States, any other part of the United States. And it makes what is happening here just so much more important and impactful and kind of almost surprising in some ways. Nothing surprises me when it comes to the California legislature, but the fact that we are talking about SB 1047 or something that could hurt innovation or help innovation, I don't know. I think it's viewed more on the other side, but we'll get there. When you see just how much maybe you even take for granted that AI is part of the community here is striking. They do say that timing is everything. We spent so long trying to come up with a date for this panel, this presentation, this issue, to have it on September 10th while the fate of the aforementioned SB 1047 is hanging in the balance was just pure luck. But I'll take it. They say that, better to be lucky than good. And we were very, very lucky. 1047, as we'll discuss at length, is just one of these seminal moments in really could be American business history, where you have a situation where you have Nancy Pelosi on one side, Elon Musk on another side, and then you have like an Anthropic in the middle of this legislation. And I think one of the things that we'll talk about today is this is really just the tip of the iceberg. No matter what happens, whether it's vetoed, whether it's signed into law, we are just seeing the beginning of a flood of AI legislation throughout this country. We're already seeing it in Europe. The UN in the next 2 weeks, from what I understand from Vince, is going to be issuing a report on AI in an attempt to try to get some uniformity across the world, the globe, on something as transformative and, as we'll discuss in my presentation, viewed as scary by some, as transformative as AI is. And so I think that that's really important. Let me just walk through the agenda. We have a great agenda put together. Started a little late, so I apologize for that, but I heard that the parking lot was closed, and that happens, or it got full and got closed. So let's start. What's going to happen? We're going to begin with my partner, Shannon Jaworski, who heads up our digital privacy and cyber privacy?
Cyber privacy and data innovation.
Data innovation. She is the head of that practice. She's also the co-head of our AI working group in practice. Shannon is a titan, and we're just recognized. I saw this as a 2024 woman leader in tech law for your pioneering work in AI compliance and strategy. So Shannon will be presenting on kind of the global perspective of AI, both including the EU Act, of course, which informs a lot of what you're seeing in California and other states. Then we're going to turn to Tom Kem for a view of AI from the inside. For those of you who don't already know Tom, he is a Silicon Valley author, entrepreneur, and seed investor. He authored the best-selling book containing big tech. I did not ask Tom if he brought additional books and would sign them, but if you have books from Tom, I'm sure he will sign them for you. He's the founder of Centrify, which is now Delinea, and a leading cloud security company. And you've been recognized for your contributions to major privacy and AI laws, and received commendations from state senates in California and Texas. And for what it's worth, I've never put those two state senates together. They couldn't be more diametrically, different. I can only imagine you receiving a commendation from Tony Atkins on one side and from Dan Patrick on the other. So well done. We will then hear from Sean Randolph, the esteemed senior director of the Bay Area Council Economic Forum. Fortunately, most of you know Sean, so I don't have to go through all of his achievements and accolades. Following that, we'll hear from another titan, Ahmad Thomas, who is the CEO of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. He also has a very impressive resume that thankfully many of you know already. The thing I found most interesting was that at one point, Ahmad started his, well, not at one point, he started his career as a staffer to Senator Dianne Feinstein. And so Ahmad is very familiar with how legislatures work and how Congress works or doesn't work, as I'm sure he can mention. Then we're going to have a quick kind of panel. We'll stop with the presentations. We'll do a little panel where we're just going to talk about the fate of SB 1047 or our predictions. As some of you may know, I represent FanDuel and DraftKings across the country and try to legalize sports betting. We've done a masterful job, or a great job everywhere but California, where we failed miserably, but catastrophically, some would say. But I was going to say, we're going to use that and we'll put some odds down on whether he's going to veto or sign the bill into law. I think it's obviously very timely and very important. And then after that discussion, I will end with kind of where we're going to be headed, and to the extent that you want to get involved and help shape the legislation, how you can do that. So Shannon, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Jeremy. So we're going to drill down on SB 1047. Tom's going to talk about what's going on behind the curtain. We're going to talk about California AI legislation writ large. And Jeremy's going to provide an overview of what's happening at the state level. But before we do that, we wanted to sort of set the stage and help you understand the global context and the drivers behind AI legislation. So we have the big picture. AI has moved from a somewhat niche technology that I think people knew was sort of the machine behind their Netflix algorithm to prime time, to a global driver of innovation impacting almost every industry from where I sit. And we act for companies across multiple industries, and every company, big and small, is adopting AI at an incredible pace. And with this rapid growth, there are emerging concerns about privacy, security, ethics, the potential misuse of AI have emerged. And this has prompted governments worldwide to consider legislation. And it's happened so fast. We were in a place last year where we had 1 or 2 state AI laws. And as Jeremy's going to talk about, I think in the last year, there were around 700 bills proposed. That's just in the US. So globally, the landscape is proliferating with AI bills. And they range from the mundane to we're going to form a committee to talk about what kind of AI legislation that we're going to pass, to the kill switch laws, which are designed to really around safety. But it's a very tricky line because on the one hand, governments want to ensure that AI systems are safe and secure and the technology emerges with guardrails in place. On the other hand, they want to ensure that innovation is unfettered. So this is the balance that governments are seeking to strike. They want to foster trust in these new technologies. And Silicon Valley is this great example of moving fast and breaking things. We've heard that for years. We're just going to ask for forgiveness and not permission. But this is a moment where governments are slowing down and saying, actually, we don't want to break really big things. This is really important, and we need to regulate in the right way. And SB 1047 that Tom's going to talk about is a real flashpoint for this. That is very central to this debate between stifling innovation and regulating appropriately and reasonably. So moving on to the next slide, and this slide. This slide was, I used AI to put this graphic together, and it seems to think that a central place of
Minneapolis
is Canada and Siberia. So there's a lot to learn from that. So what else is happening at a global level? There's a strategic competition for dominance. Countries like the US, China, and the EU are racing to establish dominance in AI, as it's really seen as a key to future economic, military, and technological power. It's an AI arms race. And what's fueling that arms race is data. And from where I sit in our data practice, we see companies across the board finding sources of data to fuel AI innovation. And it's this competition for vast amounts of data, which is crucial for training AI systems. And the countries with more access to data are going to be the ones that rise to the top. And this is a really played out in a really interesting way from where I sit. We've seen countries like the EU and China regulate the transborder flow of data. So the EU has always had restrictions and limitations on what data can flow outside of the EU. Russia, China, India, they all have data localization laws or laws that restrict or inhibit the transfer of data outside of the borders. Surprisingly, the US has never, until this year, had any restriction on the flow of data outside of the US. And then in February, March of this year, new laws are emerging that will restrict and limit the flow of data to other countries. And I have to think that central to that emerging legislation is this theme of data being the fuel for AI. So moving on to the next slide, there are a few different approaches to legislation globally. People talk about the unified approach in the EU, where you have a single law, the EU AI Act. But I think that's a little bit misleading because there's the EU AI Act, but alongside that, you have digital strategy legislation in the EU, the Data Act, the AI liability directive, the product liability directive, the copyright directive, the GDPR. So while it's stated that the EU AI Act is a single law for Europe, it's not really that true. In the UK, they, following Brexit, they're not bound by any EU approach. They have their own strategy, and they've come out with guidelines and have said that AI will be regulated by existing entities as AI falls within their jurisdictional authority. So there's that sort of approach that we have these existing governmental bodies that know how to regulate medical devices, as one example, or advertising. And the UK is taking the approach that these existing organizations can regulate AI as it falls within their jurisdictional authority. The US has been somewhat similar. We have the state AI laws that are emerging. Tom, Jeremy talked about those. State privacy laws that have provisions in relation to automated decision-making technology. You have a lot of governmental agencies coming out and making strong statements about regulating AI. So the CFPB, the FCC, the FTC have all come out and said, we are going to regulate AI as it falls within our jurisdictional authority, and they've not been shy about doing so already, especially the FTC. Canada, they've proposed a federal law, so a sort of single law approach to legislation. China has come out with a range of different regulations on AI, so that go into effect in different times. They were really a forerunner there. And then Israel has been very open in making statements about, we want to allow innovation in AI, and we're not going to strongly regulate it. There are guidelines for promoting responsible AI innovation through policy and guidelines. So really a soft legislative touch there. So lots of different approaches to legislation. And I think what's challenging for companies against this backdrop is there's so much law. How can companies keep up with the legislation? How can they comply with all of these emerging laws? So what's helpful is that there are themes to the legislation. The laws are thematic around safety, around transparency. They're focused on high risk or prohibited AI, looking at deep fakes or labeling of AI, accountability, human oversight. These are all themes that are central to the emerging legislation pretty much globally, which is very helpful for companies to understand that the risks and the laws fall into very discrete buckets that they can build compliance programs against the backdrop. I think what's really interesting from the safety perspective, I read just this morning that a company, an AI startup that's been around for 3 months, just had a $1 billion cash investment. And their theme, their technology and their whole premise is safe super intelligence. And the whole idea is that they're going to develop safe AI systems. I just thought that was fascinating. Also showed me that maybe I'm in the wrong business. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the EU AI Act. And I think what's important here is that it is going to be a paradigm for global legislation. It has this category of unacceptable risk. Those are things like social scoring, using CCTV for emotional intelligence in the public spaces, high risk AI, and then limited and low risk AI. And I think what's important, really important there is the Brussels effect, and that this is going to form a blueprint for global AI legislation, which is why companies are paying such close attention to it. But that's my sort of really high level overview that I wanted to put out there before we move on to California more specifically. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Tom.
All right, thank you. So I've historically been an entrepreneur. So the last company was a cybersecurity company. So I went through raising venture capital. We heavily used AI for detecting bad things. And over the last few years, I've gotten the policy bug. So starting in 2020, I worked with a guy by the name of Alistair McTaggart, and I worked on the Prop 24 campaign to pass the California Privacy Rights Act. And then over the last few years, I've been working as a technical advisor for State Senator Josh Becker. And last year, Senator Becker was able to pass and have Newsom sign the California Delete Act. And I proposed that, drafted it, helped evangelize. And this year, I'm working on not 1047, but working on a bill that's right now in front of the governor. That's SB 942. So I just want to say I don't speak for the state senator, and do have a piece of legislation that I've been intimately involved with that's on the governor's desk as well. California is pretty interesting in that, compared to other state legislators, in that we have a full-time legislator. They have relatively big staffs. A lot of, including Senator Becker, but Senator Lowenthal, Assembly Member Rebecca Bauer-Cahan, others have actually come from tech, and they understand the technology, which is sometimes you don't see that at the federal level. Furthermore, with Prop 24, the California Privacy Rights Act, we were able to build a platform that allows the ability not to actually lower the floor, but build on top of that. And so what California has really become from a legislative perspective is a set of Lego building blocks that people are building on top of. So for example, like the California Delete Act, which provides consumers in 2026 the ability to have a single place to have their data deleted from data brokers. It was built on top of the CCPA, which was amended by CPRA, and the data broker registry, et cetera. So you see these building blocks, and over the last year or so, the legislators have like all of a sudden kind of realized that and are building on top of that as well. I think the other thing that's unique is that there is a supermajority in California, so you can get things done. And there's a growing consensus that California has to do things, given that Congress is dysfunctional, and that we missed the boat with the ills associated with social media, and there's a strong desire to get ahead of the curve. So much like Shannon talked about the Brussels effect, there definitely is a California effect or Sacramento effect going on right now. So what I'm going to talk about is the bills. There was 30 bills proposed, and there are 19 on the governor's desk right now. So that's a pretty big hit rate right there. So I'm going to talk about a few of those. Obviously, the big kahuna is 1047. Then I'm going to talk about a couple of the bills that got killed. And then I'm going to talk about something that's unique. I talked about CPRA and that amended the CCPA. That actually created an entity called the California Privacy Protection Agency that is right now writing regulations for what's called automated decision-making, which is really, artificial intelligence. So let's jump into 1047. It fits in Shannon's safety category, right? It's a safety bill. And it's designed for companies and entities that are spending $100 million to train their AI models. I don't know if any of those exist right now. Maybe there are a few. So it's more future leaning with this. And because it's a safety bill, it really fits in with protections against screening for catastrophic things happening, harms happening, and there's specific mention of chemical, biological, radioactive, and nuclear weaponry. So if we were just talking about that, then people probably would say, well, what's the big deal? Like, how many people are building AI models for nuclear weapons, right? Well, yeah, of course, we should be able to do that. The issue is that covered models also include this concept of harm that is mass casualties. And of course, no one would be against that. But the other aspect is $500 million worth of potential damage. And if you really start thinking about things like if you build AI that does stock trading and it makes a mistake, it can cause $500 million worth of damage. And then I think it's also kind of the libertarian streak that we have in Silicon Valley is like, will this impede innovation, et cetera? The bill itself is quite prescriptive. And so the philosophy that coming from a privacy area historically has been, don't be as prescriptive and then allow an agency to build regulations on top of it. This is incredibly prescriptive, right? And that's why there's a lot of devils in the details. The prescriptiveness includes pre-training requirements, security measures, kill switches that Shannon talked about, testing procedures. That's just in the pre-training. There's a whole list of things that need to be done. Then you've got the pre-deployment requirements, and that includes, could this possibly have a critical harm, right? You have to assess that. Could it cause mass casualties, or could it cause $500 million worth of damage? And then you start thinking, well, I gave a financial service, but what about pharmaceutical AI that potentially could cause something as well? There's post-deployment audit requirements, post-deployment compliance, there's incident reporting requirements, and there's even requirements associated with computing labs that they have to report. If they see something going on, they have to report, they have to potentially shut things down. And then, so this is very controversial. And you can kind of see some of the other bullet points associated with it. Has the bill evolved as time has gone on? Yes, it has. You can see in the last bullet that they've relaxed some languages. But at the end of the day, it is very prescriptive. And at the end of the day, it's the governor that has to make a decision. Do we have a significant AI safety bill that, when it comes to safety, is somewhat on par with what people are doing in Europe? The bill that I worked on is SB 942. This is in the labeling and transparency bucket that Shannon talked about. And this would require large AI providers to label AI-generated content. Furthermore, this would require large Gen AI providers to provide an AI detection tool. Now, let me tell you what it doesn't do. And it's funny because I'll read an article, someone will complain about like their kid's homework, it was detected by AI. This doesn't do text, right? So it's immediately like, you haven't read the bill if you're criticizing this because it doesn't cover text. The other thing is, which is unlike what 1047, is that we wanted to set initially a high bar, greater than 1 million users for utilizing this. And so this probably would only apply to at most 20 or 30 companies, and just see how this goes. And then the other kind of controversy with labeling and transparency is, are you going to enforce watermarking? Can people kind of cut and paste and take out the little watermark? What this bill does is actually says with the large Gen A providers, you need to give the users the ability, the option that when they generate something to put a watermark on it, right? Okay. But what you do have to do is that you actually have to have a latent disclosure, which is like metadata that identifies that you actually did that as well. So we don't require watermarking. So people start going on this whole rant about watermarking, et cetera. No, it's more like you have to create metadata as well. And then the other thing, which I think is probably the biggest innovation, is that we're going to require the large Gen AI providers to provide an AI detection tool, but it only applies, they only have to factor in the AI that they've generated themselves. And what they do is they either look at the watermark or they look behind the picture to see if something's been written, which is the latent disclosure, and make the determination. Obviously, if someone deletes the metadata or mucks with it, they're not able to do it, right? Just like if I back up my car and run over an orange, it's squished. I can't say, did that orange really come from Safeway or not as well? And the thing that I'm actually most excited about is that we've actually provided an API. It's a requirement for an API. So a third-party developer could actually provide a website that you could upload an image, a video, et cetera, and it can go out and ask the 20 large Gen A providers, did you create it as well? So it gives consumers the ability to eventually have a central portal where, or a journalist could go and say, is this audio file, is it really Joe Biden? Is this really an image of Donald Trump tripping on or slipping on a banana peel, et cetera? And in the end, we were able to work so that there was actually no tech opposition in the end as well. The other bill that's in the transparency, which I've been working a little bit with the group that's behind this, the Transparency Coalition, is Irwin's 2013, which would require developers of AI to actually disclose and provide documentation about the training data. There's, I think, 12 different things. Really cool in it is that they have to reveal the source of the data sets, any copyright material, if the data was purchased or licensed, if it contains any personal information, aggregate consumer data, and the time frame in which they actually collected as well. So again, the focus here is labeling, transparency with these type of bills. The other AI bills, and I'm not going to go through the other, so I've talked about 3 so far, there's another 16. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that are mentioned right here. So Assembly Member Berman, who's my local assembly member, thought it was crazy that we have laws against CSAM, but supposedly, or that there's a loophole that if it's created by AI, that it can get by, and so this would criminalize that. And then there's a group called Cited, which I'm now a technical advisor to, that has really focused on election related. And so 2 of these bills right here have been sponsored by Cited, that basically, again, provides transparency in terms of, was this content election-related material generated, et cetera. And then there's a couple other bills. And if people have specific questions about one of the bills, I think I have a pretty good understanding with them. The bills that didn't get through, oops, I don't know what happened to my slide right here, was a more prescriptive version of the 942. So the WICS bill was actually in competition with the Becker bill that I worked on. Much more prescriptive, would require actually testing to see if people could break. It would require cameras to do software updates. It would require, the bar would be for anyone creating Gen AI. In the end, it didn't get through the Senate, didn't come up for a vote at the end. I don't know the end politics of that, but it could have been very possible that the governor would have had to choose between one of the 2. And then the other one is the discrimination bill by Bauer-Cahan, which would basically, hey, does this impact, do impact assessments? Originally, it was much broader, but then they just did it with employment. But even then, both have said that they're going to try again. In the case of Bauer-Cahan, she did it last year. So I would not be surprised that that both bills come up, and the WICS bill, if Newsom signs 942, would build on top of 942. And then last but not least, that working on Prop 24, the CPRA, in 185, 1798, 185, this is what the section that tells what the agency, the regulatory agency, there's one sentence says, you're going to create regulations for automated decision-making. And the CPPA has come up with at least 20 pages, probably closer to 30 pages of regulations. You can see an example on the right. And I'm not involved in this debate. I know the people that are, but in the last CPPA board member McTaggart, raised a bunch of concerns. And so they're still internally debating, from what the public record shows, that is the definition of the regulations, is the definition of AD, automated decision-making, i.e. too broad? Should it only, who should it apply to? The opt-out, that should it adopt the Colorado, because right now, if people can say, I want to opt out of automated decision-making, no matter what, and Colorado actually says, well, only if it's purely done, you can opt out if like humans are barely involved or not involved as well. So there's just a bunch of big debate going on right there. But former Senator Hertzberg actually got on the phone and said, hey, you guys may want to wait to see what gets signed or what legislation. And so there is concern that's been voiced by some people is the regulatory agency kind of dictating and pushing things maybe too far over and beyond the legislature. And that's going to probably shake out over the next 3 to 6 months. So a lot of exciting stuff happening in California, up to 19 bills being passed, up to 30 pages of regulations that could be passed or get approved over the next 6-9 months. So stay tuned.
You know what, Tom, I was going to ask a couple questions as the moderator, just to throw things around a little bit. Can I ask, so would 1047, how would 1047 and the CPVA regs coexist? In other words, is there a preemption? Is there an occupy the field situation? If
There isn't safety stuff in the regs.
Okay. So the regs just left that to 1047, but 1047 wouldn't actually have a positive in stopping.
There would be conflict if Bauer-Cahan's bill would have gone through with the regs. There would have been some overlap right there. Yeah, I mean, I really think if you look at kind of the three horsemen bills that would basically have given California the equivalent of the EU AI Act would be 1047. It would have been the Bauer-Cahan bill regarding discrimination and all that stuff. And then it would either be Becker or the more prescriptive Wicks bill. So it's very possible that California could get kind of sort of 2/3 of EU AI Act if Newsom signs that.
I have two more questions.
Okay.
And then we're also at the end, we'll have a Q&A, but one is with the Transparency Act, which has not gotten as much attention nationally as some of the other acts, as 1047, almost because it's behind 1047.
Yes, actually, that is, I think, I can speak for Senator Becker that we're very glad that the light is shining on that.
Yes.
And all the other 18 bills have not gotten the same thing.
Right.
But nonetheless, we have worked very hard to collaborate with the tech industry, and there's no formal tech opposition that has been registered in the final version.
And was text in any version of the bill, the draft, the other, was that something that came out? Or if you don't,
It did come out.
it came out. Okay. I was just curious, just because it seems like that's a tough area to figure out what is AI.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say one thing, which is the opposition to both the Wicks bill and the Becker bill as it relates to the labeling, the watermarking, et cetera, was that the what the tech industry initially said in January, that this is technically impossible. But the technology has advanced so much that we were in a situation where lobbyists were saying this can't be done. And Google had their conference, and a guy got up on stage and talked about this technology called SynthID that did exactly that as well. So the rapid changes in technology is pretty amazing when it comes to the areas that Shannon talked about. She already mentioned that there's a company that's doing safety, et cetera. So we're getting to the point where that the technology, will surpass some of the proposed regulations.
That's great. Sean, you want to take it from the Bay Area Council perspective?
Absolutely, thanks. I'll try to just shed a little light on why this is such a consequential topic for us here in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, and why this conversation about legislation is so important. There we go. So this shows the capitalization of the largest companies in the Bay Area and in the US. So of the 50 largest companies in the US by market capitalization, 17 of those are in the Bay Area, in the Bay Area, 5 of the 17 are in the top 10. So if we look at the big bubbles there, so NVIDIA, guess what? Last year they were a lot smaller. Now they're pretty close to Apple, if not larger than Apple. They make the high-end chips that drives this whole story right now. You look at companies like Google dropping massive amounts of money into the sector, but companies like Apple, Meta, in big partnerships with the big Gen AI providers, companies like Amazon and Microsoft, also here in the Bay Area, sinking massive amounts of money into the generative AI sector here in the Bay Area. And all these other companies, you can talk to Visa, you can talk to Oracle, they're all really in the forefront of implementing these kinds of things. So this really is a place where investment in AI is coming to the floor in the Bay Area on a national and a global scale. So if we think about it globally, about half of the top 50 AI companies in the world are local companies here in the Bay Area. And a lot of names that you wouldn't see every day, but certainly important in the field with a lot of different kinds of focal points. I think what's significant about that is that this covers the full spread of technology. It's not like the Bay Area does one thing or somebody else does something else, that we're focused, we're leading on the hardware. You look at what's going on with NVIDIA, of course, Intel, but then the foundational models, the large language model, you got your Anthropic, your ChatGPT, of course, but then there's a whole range of industry-specific uses and industry-specific applications. So if we go back there, you can see industry-specific uses, gaming, healthcare, education, manufacturing, IoT is in there, cross-industry applications, video search, all of those things, and then a whole range of AI development tools. So it's really the full stack of what's happening in the industry you find here, very integrated in the Bay Area. So that's reflected in what's happening around investment. You can see, again, more than half of the funding globally in AI is going into local Bay Area-based companies. If you look at the 10 most highly capitalized companies in the world in AI, guess what? More than half, I think maybe either 6 or now 7 out of 10 are there. So you can see this big spike in 2023. We started to see companies like Amazon and Microsoft putting $10 billion at a throw into some of the local companies that are now the market leaders. But you can see consistently where it's more than half in any given quarter of the funding coming into the sector. Oh, there we are. So this gets mirrored or reflected in employment. So this map shows where the AI-related job postings are across the United States. And you can see the immense concentration of those job postings here in the Bay Area. And these are, job postings with different kinds of job profiles. There are 13 other metro areas that were compared. And, everybody is kind of doing something here, but just it's significant, the density of the employment. And why is that? It's because we're starting with this enormous IT, AI, technology, engineering skills base in the area already, which is pretty easily converted and flipped over into very focused AI kinds of roles. And it's why, by the way, companies come here, because very often what are they looking for? They're looking for the talent, the capability to do the engineering, to design the algorithms that AI is going to require. It's already here. So just thinking for a moment about the AI skills, it's a pretty diverse set of skills. So you've got programming, of course. There's a lot of machine learning involved, designing algorithms to address complex problems. Obviously, mathematics and statistics is really important. We're talking about STEM skills, of course, data science and analysis, natural language processing, because of course, a lot of this is happening in response to actual natural language use, how we all speak. And then there's actually a communications and soft skill side, because as we're talking about regulation, we're also talking about the management of AI systems to address all these different range of issues that AI is coming up with. And that's an entirely new employment category now for a lot of different companies. So kind of turning to California, here we go. Come on. There we are. There are somewhat different approaches, as we know, given that there are bills at the governor's desk right now to how to address this. I think it's noteworthy that if we go back to the fall of 2023, the governor came up with an executive order on the implementation of AI and AI strategies inside of state government. And it did a number of significant things. One is it recognized the risks right up front, didn't sweep them under the table. In the end, as the plan has been fleshed out, Individual agencies have the assignment to develop their own kind of risk management strategies and mitigation strategies, because they're all doing different things and there are different risks depending on your agency and its role, but under the oversight of the government's office. But at the same time, they are encouraged to accelerate the adoption of AI within their agencies as a way to improve government services. And so guess what? Government employees in California will be given AI training. And that will include training in how to manage it and mitigate the risks that they'll be dealing with within their own agencies. And then another interesting innovation, the state has created like 6 pilot programs, or will over time create 6 pilot programs, 6 months in duration, to test out sort of proof of concept on some of these ideas. And so I think one of them that I think maybe the first out of the gate is a partnership between the state of California and NVIDIA for workforce development. So the goal there is to train 100,000 people in California in AI skills and across an entire spectrum. And so this involves training models, it involves hackathons, different kinds of responsibilities taken on individually or jointly by the state, by NVIDIA. A significant part of this will run through the community college system, which tells us in part, we're not just talking about engineers and scientists coming out of Stanford or Berkeley, we're talking about people with sort of tech skills coming out of the community college system and having them geared up to be part of that economy. So worth looking at those pilots as they come out. But I think the NVIDIA one is a really interesting model. And it does really focus on the idea of enabling AI growth, AI implementation as rapidly as feasible in state government and in California. So just a couple of thoughts on AI more broadly, why, it's being encouraged in many ways. It's so many of the potential applications will go to enhancing productivity, improving government services, improving private services. So I think for a lot of us, it is speeding routine tasks. Also, like manufacturing, you could go very quickly from an idea to a prototype. It might have taken 6 or 8 months longer in the past. Now it might take a couple of weeks or a month at the most. Smart city services, leveraging data for that. The biomedical field and health is maybe the standout area for applications where you think about how long clinical trials take. Accelerating that process, moving research more rapidly into therapies, and cutting months or years off the research process to get those products in people's hands. You can predict individual responses to different cancer treatments in a very rapid, efficient way. Doctors are starting to use it for clinical notes after appointments, so they're spending less time on paperwork and more time with the patient. And of course, there's a lot of energy and climate applications as well, which is really important to us here in California. So there's some broad strategies around development of this. One is obviously continue to invest heavily in public sector research, investing at talent at multiple levels. And again, that's the higher end university research level, but it's really down to the technician and the technical level and everything in between. And we talked a little bit earlier about data and data sets. That's the oil for this machine. The larger the data set, the more you can do with it. So trying to democratize access to those large data sets so more people and developers can actually develop those applications. Couple more thoughts. AI is becoming a general purpose tool. It's kind of like the wheel, the original general purpose tool. It's going to be absolutely everywhere. We're looking at the skills, the STEM skills in K-12 are so essential. Companies are definitely shedding jobs. Some are. Back office, HR, basic IT, a lot of those things like that, fairly simple stuff, are starting to go away. But there's no hiring for AI roles. Right now, a lot of AI management, algorithm design, but a lot of other things as well. And we're seeing that those AI skills can bring a very, very large salary premium, we know here in the Bay Area. And so for existing workers, I think it is a fair question, like how will this impact your job? But there is a large opportunity to upskill, existing workers, augmenting what they can do, improving the quality of what they're doing. And as part of that happens, I think we may be breaking the original sort of pathway, university to job ladder. Because guess what? A lot of people can actually do this without a university degree. You can actually write algorithms and do a lot of coding without being trained as a coder, which means if in the hands of a lot of ordinary people, you can be very productive and create a lot of new value. So for that reason, it's really important to increase societal access to these tools as broadly as possible. Thinking about the NVIDIA example, partnerships with private industry can bring a lot of resources to the table. And then it gets us to this final question, which is the topic here today, of how do we enable AI growth and development. A few months ago at the Economic Institute, Bay Council, we hosted representatives from 16 countries to talk about what each country was doing in their own respective area to develop or regulate or promote AI. And it was obvious every country in the world of any consequence is thinking about this right now. It's a global conversation. We happen to be in the middle of it. Last week, the Director of Legislative Affairs for the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy came to visit, met with tech company public policy folks to talk about the regulatory perspective, what's going on in California versus the national level. So how we handle this is, extremely consequential, whether we take a prescriptive defensive posture up front or one that's more based on broad principles and parameters and looks at individual risk cases further down the road is really important. And it's really critical for competitiveness. Why are we so competitive in the Bay Area, in Silicon Valley and California? Because we do tend, in the end of the day, to move fast and are very creative that way. And I think it's fair to say that anywhere in the world we look, companies, whether they've been in Europe or China or here or elsewhere, whether and how they adopt AI is going to be really fundamental to their long-term competitiveness. And so this just brings us back to that earlier stage, why this matters so much for us here in California, but especially Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. If you think half the top 10 generative AI companies in the world are based here, the train is being driven from here. These involve a lot of global partnerships, of course, but at the end of the day, if we can continue to lead, we'll continue to benefit more than anywhere in the world. Thanks.
Hey, Sean, where would you say, is there another, it's striking to me that Northern California, because I don't want to get you, Ahmad, into a fight here as to Silicon Valley versus the Bay Area. Is there another place in the United States that would be even close to claiming the AI capital or being the AI capital of the United States? Or is it really just this area here?
It's overwhelmingly this area. It's not just this area. So you can find some really innovative AI companies all over the map. There's a bunch in New York, a bunch in Israel, France, and elsewhere. So it's a global phenomenon, but at the moment, there's no place that approaches the density of this activity or the diversity of this activity as we have in the Bay Area.
I got one more question, and I'll ask the same of Ahmad afterwards. Is there, in your experience in the Bay Area with the Bay Area economy, has there ever been an industry that's comparable to this? Is it the software industry, or is this the boom of all booms for this area?
Well, the way to answer that is this, that why did this happen so fast? Why is everybody all hair on fire now? Well, we unconsciously laid the groundwork for it going back decades. If we figure like decades ago, we laid in fiber all around the world. Then we created the internet. And the fiber was for telecom. Then we created the internet. Then we pretty much digitalized all the information of the world, or most of it. And then we got the cloud. So when you think about it, like all the infrastructure generated by AI is there. It wasn't designed for it, but it's all there. So when it started to take off, it just exploded because there's nothing in the way. Other than, of course, the energy requirements of data centers, and people will solve that. So how does this compare to prior booms in the Bay Area? I think what it is the latest leap for Silicon Valley. again, you go back decades and you see how it really led the world in the semiconductor sector. And it went into the personal computer sector, and then it went into the mobile sector. Each case essentially creating a new discipline, a new industry. And then as that matured, it spread around the world. Guess what? The Valley made another leap, and it was on to a new thing that built on the last. So what it feels like is this is the next big transformative leap for the Bay Area and Silicon Valley. And I think it has a long, long way to run.
And yet most of those other leaps really didn't engender legislation. In other words, you think about the leaps you've just discussed, I can't think of one. Maybe the data for the CCPA or, would be the closest, but none has actually been the subject of legislation in Sacramento, I imagine.
No, not that I'm aware of anyway.
Yeah, that's just kind of,
Shannon may know better than
yeah, it just kind of came up that difference here. Well, okay, Maude, you wanted to take it from the Silicon Valley Leadership Group?
Yeah, of course. And first, a huge thank you, Jeremy, Shannon, Orrick, for having me. Honored to be here. I've been fortunate to do several deals with Orrick in my investment banking life, and a wonderful firm. And our partners, Bay Area Council, with Sean and Kirsten and Philip, and of course, Jim Wonderman. Jim's a visionary who's really driving this conversation to create a new mega business group for the region, which I believe is sorely needed right now. So again, thank you very much for having me. And really only 2 points from me. I know better than to show up with slides after Sean. Incredible presentation, Sean. And thank you. So I don't usually use slides, and hopefully that will be okay with folks. But the 2 perspectives that I want to speak to is, one, talking about where I believe the greatest fear or threat exists to AI technologies scaling and developing at the pace that we would like to see, certainly at Silicon Valley Leadership Group. And second, I will speak to this notion of value creation and why I believe getting this right for our companies locating here and making our region more competitive is going to be central to, again, at SVLG, our thesis of how we scale these technologies at the pace that we believe they should be moving at. So first, in terms of the threats, we've had a lot of meetings, as you've heard, with Sean, in partnership with great institutions like Bay Area Council, on our own, with global entities. And when we're in these closed door meetings with the elected leaders in Sacramento and DC in our region, my opinion of what I believe the greatest concern is not AI robots taking over the world, right? It's about labor and jobs and displacement of the workforce. I believe it is an item that we need to come to terms with and speak frankly about. And I think it's something that we need to be out in front of, developing practical solutions to solve for it. Now, at a esteemed firm like Orrick, you're probably not worried about AI replacing you all, although you do look at functions, traditional paralegal functions from 2 decades ago, right, that no longer exist due to AI. But I think for many of the elected leaders that we speak to, we're talking about marginalized communities. We're talking about opportunity sets and what opportunities exist for individuals that might not have a 4-year degree or advanced degree. And I would go out on a limb, again, just speaking here, my opinion, to say that the concerns are not unfounded in terms of what AI technologies may bring to the workforce and to our labor markets and how they will be transformed. So what are we doing? You mentioned I work for Senator Feinstein. She used to always tell me, don't come to me with problems. Make sure you got a solution when you show up and present to her. And so I'll speak to where I believe there's one solution, and maybe in the Q&A or afterwards, glad to go into more detail. But it's exactly as Sean touched upon, which is focusing on human oversight of AI jobs that don't require a 4-year degree or don't require an advanced degree, and could be great, high-paying jobs that potentially can lead to STEM, further STEM education and careers down the line. So what are we specifically doing to try to address this? We're all in on AI at SVLG. We've created an entire institute, the Institute for California AI Policy. And within a few weeks of creating that earlier this year, we were able to fund our first initiative, which is a partnership with Foothill De Anza Community College District. And Dr. Lee Lambert, their chancellor, who sits on our board, was a driving force behind this. But we are working with Foothill De Anza to develop a curriculum whereby community college students can take coursework that prepares them for human oversight of AI jobs. And again, pulling from Sean's notes here, we've been in close contact with the governor's team around the NVIDIA partnership, which is a much larger scale and statewide. But we believe if we can develop curricula that can be used across community colleges in our region and then statewide, that's a game changer. And I think for a lot of us coming from the private sector or tech, law, banking, et cetera, you think, oh, changing a few courses, not that big a deal. It's actually moving mountains. I mean, you would be shocked at what it takes to change community college curriculum in California. So I believe that steps like this, where we can successfully pilot work that goes beyond only the certificate programs, which I believe add a lot of value and for the proper applications can really be life-changing for those who participate. I would assert that this type of community college curriculum and training opportunities provide opportunities to more diverse set of students and potentially touch an even broader set of future employees for your companies. So I hope in laying out that first example, it is acknowledging the problem up front, right? I think we do ourselves a disservice to say, AI is coming, everything's going to be fine. You all don't worry, nothing's going to happen to the workforce, but rather say, we believe that this is going to have an impact that provides opportunity for everyone, but we need to be strategic and work together with public-private partnerships to ensure that we're affording targeted opportunities at low cost to those within our communities who need it most. And the last point I would say here is that I believe that there is a wealth of hidden talent that remains untapped within our community college systems, within our marginalized communities, whereby AI and potential opportunities and human oversight of AI jobs can be transformational for these communities. So you see there, as I close on this topic, we're taking something that can be very scary. And I know for a lot of our leaders elected in Sacramento, it's something that they hear about from their constituencies, but we're turning it into an opportunity. And beyond just words, we're actually trying to show data, right? And trying to show successful pilots that can be built upon and invested in by the public sector if they work. So these ideas, there's zero public sector investment at this stage in what we're doing. It's all privately funded. But I think if it works, you can come back with a bill, or you can come back to public sector partners and say, hey, let's invest in this to a significant degree. And I think that also shows a really high aptitude for high return on investment. The second point I want to make is just around value creation. And there are a few things that I'll share here that I believe are very relevant. I think the first topic is very high level, which speaks to the business environment, the business climate in California, the business climate in Silicon Valley. And there's no need to really harp on this other than to say, at least as I would describe it, there's no better place in the world to do business. The secret sauce of this region remain as powerful as ever before. Our ingredients: access to capital, access to talent, the diversity of our communities and our research institutions. I think that cocktail remains as powerful as ever, as I said, and unmatched. But when I look at the delta between California and other states, when I think about the very competitive global marketplace in which we operate, I would assert that that delta, our competitive advantage when you measure it, is perhaps never been tighter, right? That separation we've had versus the competition, place-based competition, I believe has never been so close. And AI at this inflection point really provides a significant opportunity. So acknowledging this and not resting on our laurels, what are some of the solutions? I think about this from the ground up. Our number one bill the top priority in Sacramento for SVLG this year was an AI infrastructure bill, data centers, right? And we think, well, that's not that big a deal. You want to build data centers in California, you build a big data center. We know with latency issues, they obviously have to be here and they can't be in North Carolina or Seattle or wherever. So go out and build it. Well, it turns out it's virtually impossible to build a data center, up to the 100, 200 megawatt kind of size that you need to power the next generation of AI chips. It is virtually impossible to do so in California. So with the help of Senator Cortese, he sponsored our bill to get that cap up to 200 megawatts and put it through the CEC, through the Energy Commission, which can fast track these projects. And we hit every skid you could hit and made it all the way up until literally midnight before our deadline, or almost midnight, and didn't get over the finish line this time around. But we need to look at our infrastructure from an energy grid standpoint, from an AI infrastructure standpoint, from an AI connected infrastructure standpoint, and it just has to be better. And the fact that a bill like this, that I believe could drive $1 trillion plus in market value for companies over the next 7 to 10 years, cannot be passed in the most innovative state in the country, I believe speaks to the challenges ahead. The Wiener bill. Scott Wiener is an incredible leader in the region and someone who I am grateful to have partnered on a lot of different important initiatives. And I know Jim and many of you in the room can say the same. And this is just one of those areas where we disagree. And it is not due to intentions. I think all of our intentions are aligned here. But I think for us, you've heard a lot about the bill, so I won't go into the detail anymore. But I will speak to the idea of, again, making California and our region as competitive as humanly possible. And when you look at patchwork state level AI regulation, when you look at regulation that might have a significant cost in terms of legal liability for your company, when you look at regulation that you believe may be the start of further regulation that may perhaps encourage you to locate elsewhere, all of these things are not helpful when we talk about those ingredients to make California and our region more competitive. So the comment there is where we can build more public-private, I think, connectivity around how legislation is built, I think we get better outcomes. And that's one of our issues with the EU Act, right? We don't believe at SVLG that there was enough collaboration with the private sector around solutions there. So in closing, what I would say is that there's a call to action that is significant, right? It's a call to action not to rest upon our laurels, which in Silicon Valley, I know can be easy to do, but in a hyper global competitive marketplace, I believe absent changes and absent some fundamental changes, we will sit here 10 to 20 years from now and not be in the position that we should be in regards to AI technologies. And I hope 10 to 20 years from now, we can look back at these next 2 or 3 years and point to key decisions that we've made to make California a very attractive place for AI companies to locate and scale and grow. And also, I think in that same breath, to think about our communities, to think about access to opportunity, right? And be creative in finding ways to engender new opportunities for our next generation workforce and also upskill retraining opportunities for the existing workforce. So thank you again. Just a couple thoughts.
Great, Ahmad. So we're gonna make a little change to the agenda just because I know we are at 11:30. I've still got my watch on East Coast time, so it says 2:30 to me. But at 11:30, so we're gonna I'll go forward in my presentation. I'll talk at like 1.25 to 1.4 speed to try to get this moving, and then we'll do a quick sign or veto, kind of break down the survey of the panel to whoever wants to opine, and then we'll go to Q&A. So thank you guys. I know we started a little bit late, and if those of you who we've hit kind of the limit where we were, but I'm gonna go very fast. Let's see if I can do this. Oh, okay, here we go. So that's my thing. I want to start, before I start, I promise I'm still gonna go very fast. I do want to give a shout out to Vincent Thomas, who's in the back. Vincent was it was really behind the entire marriage of our groups to do this and has been pushing for this. And we wouldn't be here today without Vincent. And then with Damon Stewart, who's my colleague, also in the back, pushing us along. So thank you so much to both of you for bringing us all together for this, really important forum today. I want to start with something that should be familiar and perhaps even a bit comforting for some of you in the room. It's our little friend.
Woo, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill.
Okay, that's enough. Yes, he is in the house, Schoolhouse Rock legend. I'm just a bill. And for many of us, me included, that was our tutorial growing up on how a bill becomes a law. I will tell you that for those of you who are easily triggered, it might be time for some earmuffs because I'm about to say something very provocative, which is that I'm just a bill was a lie. For starters, no one, and I mean no one, passes bills in Congress. Yes, there are some exceptions, but as Ahmad can probably tell you from his days, it's really hard. In fact, it's literally known as the place that good ideas go to die. Just ask your friends in the data privacy or the crypto industries how they've been doing. Everything these days in the United States is happening, and I mean everything, in the 50 state legislatures. So if you like your laws or regulations with a side of chaos, you come to the right country. Bills do not pass two chambers of any legislature, as they did in I'm Just a Bill, simply because they are a good idea. One of my favorite things that I hear from our clients is, don't they understand that we're right and that they're wrong? I'm here to tell you, and I will pull out the Joe Biden whisper for this, it doesn't matter. There we go. There are 4 factors that actually matter. It's 1, do you have the right lobbyist with the right relationships in the state? That's a very skeptical view of politics, I imagine. What impact will your bill have on the local economy? Will it have an impact on new jobs? Does it generate tax revenue for the state? 3, will the bill help or hurt the legislator at the polls or at the ballot? In other words, is it popular or unpopular with the legislators' constituents? And then factor 4 is what I like to call the X factor. That can be anything from a front page Sunday New York Times article to a 60 Minutes piece, or to a tweet from former President Trump. This was a tweet he did last weekend supporting cannabis, the recreational use of cannabis in Florida, which was kind of a shock. Or Elon Musk, who was, in favor or has been supportive of SB 1047. Of these factors, none is more important, I believe, than factor number 3, which should give you some comfort. Factor number 3, again, is what do my constituents think? So ultimately, even about all the money in politics, legislators ultimately care how this affects their constituents and will they get voted out of office. I mean, it's still selfish, but it is what it is. And legislators, I think that that's what's really behind all of this AI legislation. If you look at these questions, I mean, this is unbelievable. So this is from January, national poll. A candidate who says that the government should take a hands-off policy towards AI because here we go. What would you prefer to have? Somebody who says the government should pass legislation regulating AI versus someone who shouldn't. 76% said that they'd rather have a candidate who supports regulating AI. This is not some outlier poll. This is basically the same number that they've gotten in the last 6 polls that this organization's done and that others have done. There is no groundswell of, hey, let's leave AI alone. I think that's because we were growing up, many of us, ingrained from Hollywood with the idea that AI was really bad. I mean, one of the bills that we were just talking about, sounds like Skynet already. Hey, let's not let nuclear weapons be run by AI. That is literally the premise of Terminator. And what was fascinating from what Sean said is, the science fiction was way ahead of all the developments it took to get to where we are today. I mean, science fiction's been talking about AI since the 1950s, 1940s. So it's pretty incredible that you think about, we've been ingrained to be afraid of AI, which is why voters are where they are and why legislators are going to be so motivated to pass legislation that regulates AI because it's popular with the people who vote them in or out of office. This has led to an explosion. This phenomenon has led to an explosion in AI-related bills. So in 2022, there was a mere 67 bills introduced across the 50 states. That's pretty much, what you'll see with cannabis with sports betting, with all of the major issues you see, 67's about, that's a high level issue, maybe even a top 3 issue. In 2023, that number tripled from 67 to 190. And I remember thinking, wow, that's an amazing amount. That's nothing, guys. It went to 725 bills this year. There was a period in January and February where 50 new AI bills were introduced a week. That is unheard of. It is, I think, good news for the people in this room that all those bills didn't pass, because it would have been catastrophic, probably from what I now understand, for the Bay Area. But it just shows you the interest. There's an unprecedented amount of interest in this subject. And we're not even talking about bills that actually really also matter to AI, which is energy bills. As we just talked about, you need to have energy to actually create AI, or to fund the AI, or help AI go forward. And we don't have a lot of energy, and we have a state-by-state approach to energy regulation. That's a whole other thing. 725 is a silly number. It's almost numbing. I'm sure some of you are thinking like, hey, I'm trying to monitor this, but why even bother? So I am here today to help try to allow you to know how to monitor these bills, or keep like your focus on the bills that really matter. And then possibly even a little later, time permitting, talk about how you can shape those bills, not just, track them as they go around. Here's what we do. So let's go. What we should do is let's start with our 50-state map. You can't track bills in all 50 states. It's impossible. Trust me, I've tried it. And that's when you have like 67 to 100 bills and you have lobbyists in every state. It's still almost impossible. So what I like to do is I start by tracking the 8 to 12 states. And here what I would do is track the 8 to 12 states that have the highest probability of passing a bill like, SB 1047. What that does is it reduces the number you're tracking, and it gives you a chance to actually shape them. And I'll tell you why it's important to shape them, because as many of us who do this for a living, and this is what I do, and somebody's like, if a legislator says to their staff, you know what, I want to introduce an AI regulation bill. Like, this seems really popular. 75% of people are for it. What they'll do is they're not going to call anybody in this room. They're not going to go look on, ChatGPT or something and say, give me 5 people who will actually know something about AI. They're not going to call Tom. What they're going to do is they're just going to put in AI legislation models, and they will get SB 1047 or the Colorado bill or the Connecticut bill. And that's what they'll work off of. And they'll make it either worse or a little better, but that's what they do. It's not like there's no exchange of ideas. It's literally just, these are people making like $33,000 a year. They literally just go to the internet and print. And that, of course, is what makes things so terrifying. California actually has probably one of the more deliberative processes. Some of these states don't even have staff. It's literally just like, oh, well, this is what they did in California. Let's just go with this. Okay, I think I've made my point there. So what are we going to, when people ask me, like, how do you find these 10 to 12 states? What I typically do is I look for similar issues. So in other words, like sports betting, which, I do, or I've been involved in, we looked at what states did with daily fantasy sports, with fantasy sports contests. They're similar enough. Turns out 18 of the states that passed fantasy sports bills then ended up passing sports betting bills just because it was primed. You look at another issue like ride sharing versus car sharing, Turo versus Uber. For Turo and for Get Around, who we represented, we looked exactly at where the Uber bills were the most active at the beginning. And those happen to be very similar to states that were most active on car sharing. Here, it will be no surprise. What we're going to look at is data privacy bills or laws. And the reason for that is data privacy has almost an identical history right now to what we're seeing with AI. There, you had a situation where everybody at the outset's like, oh, Congress is going to act. I mean, I think Shannon still sends me an email do you think this bill is going to pass? And I'm like, yeah, no, it's never going to happen. It's just really, really hard to pass something like that in Congress. I've already said that. But that's what we typically do is we look at these things. So if you start with data privacy, I think I'm going to get there. These are the states that have passed data privacy laws similar to the CCPA. Not identical. Many of them are watered down versions of it. Some, like Virginia, are much closer. I just like all the cameras coming up. So those states are the states right off the bat that, I would be looking at to say, okay, this is where we're going to see the next, or where not just we'll see an SB 1047, but the likelihood an SB 1047 will be taken seriously. We actually already saw that with Utah, which is one of those states. Interestingly, Colorado and Connecticut, 2 of the states that many of us that also passed AI laws or came very close this year, regulation laws, also were data privacy at the forefront of data privacy laws. I would add 3 more states to the mix. I would add Maryland, which was the first state to tax digital ads. I would add New York, which is the first state that went after crypto, and it's New York. It also has the second most introduced bills in the country behind California on AI. And then the third one is Illinois, which has been a leader on biometric data. It actually passed its biometric data bill, I think, in 2009, 2010, much earlier than the CCPA. So they've been at the forefront of this, and just another more liberal state, more prone to regulation. And they don't have many AI companies, so they don't have the same concerns that California would have. So you start with these states. This is a lot to still monitor. That's like 22 states. So what I typically would do is I would remove Iowa, Tennessee, Indiana, Montana, New Hampshire, Connecticut, or Kentucky, Nebraska, Delaware, and Rhode Island from the list. Oh, let's go back. Bye. There we go. That's the state. These are the lists I would keep. I'd keep Utah just because, again, they passed a bill and I think that they could go farther. These are the states. If you're like, where should I be looking? These are the states to look. So now we know where to look this year or in the next year coming up. Most of the state legislatures are out of session. So we're talking about January to April, very short periods. Again, California is an outlier. Not only do they have a deliberative process with consultants and lawyers and all this, they also go year round almost. They'll go through September. Most of these states are on 90-day stretches. They go very fast and there's very little room for the opportunity to engage in the process. That's going to lead to the next question, which is, okay, so how do I do this? How do I shape it? A lot of people, many of you in the room have probably used tracking services. It's like a huge industry. Pay anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000 a month, and you will get a report spitted out to you, sent back to you with all the bills that have been introduced. You can get their text, access the text, and whether they're moving in through the process. It's helpful. I mean, if you're going to do anything, at least you have an idea that these bills exist. Problem is, of course, you're talking about 300 or 400 bills that you're still tracking. And I think I have the stars. It's sort of like the stars. Like if you look at the stars, you're not actually seeing the stars today. You're seeing like years, hundreds, millions of years ago. The light just traveled. It's just my fun scientific fact for the day. Same with tracking services. You're not actually seeing these bills where they are today. You're seeing where those bills were when they made it into the system. That could have been 24 hours ago. That could have been 48 or 72 hours ago. I should tell you that most clients who come to me and say, well, I'm using a tracking service, I'm like, well, that would be great. You'll at least know when the bill, a couple of days later when the bill passes. Hard to engage. The process, even like if you think about SB 1047, if you had a tracking service, that bill would have already been written and introduced and probably moved through the Senate before you even knew what was going on and engaged. Here, of course, you had that big gap between the Senate and the Assembly, but so much of that bill was baked before the session, before it even was introduced and it was caught up on a tracking service. So again, that's where you get to a point of the limitations of tracking services. Going to this next thing. I want to go back to the 4 factors. So what do you do? Look, if you have $2 million, and not many of us have $2 million hanging around, you had $2 million, I would recommend that you go hire 10 lobbyists in each of these 10 states or 12 states, pay them, and they're on top of it, and they're going to engage on your behalf, and they're going to actually go to the legislators and make sure that you're heard, your voice is heard before the bill might even be introduced. They'll know who are the likely candidates to introduce it. They'll go to leadership. That's what lobbyists do. I suspect that some of the companies who are really big in the space are doing this, but you'd be surprised if you think you're leaving this to OpenAI. They don't have a single registered lobbyist today. If you think you're leaving it to Google, Google has about 26 other issues that they deal with, as does Amazon, as does Microsoft. So while this is a huge focus of theirs, you're also, of course, leaving your fate to the people that have the lobbyists. That's what I'm, so if you're like, oh yeah, let me just leave it to the others. Well, I would just find out what Amazon and Google think. They at least have lobbyists in most states. That is going to be the most important thing. The one beneficial factor for you guys is number 2, the impact of the tax on the local economy. That is why I think SB 1047 is truly hanging in the balance right now. Is we're basically hearing that it's a big, major negative impact. If you're still looking though, like I said, to engage, you can either do your own lobbyists, and there's 2 other ways you can kind of find ways to have lobbyists. You can create a trade association. It doesn't take more than 4 or 5 companies, really doesn't take more than 2. Pool your resources together. As I said, 2 million is probably the number you're looking at. Or another option, and I'm not the one to decide this, you go to an organization like, let's say, I don't know, Bay Area Council or Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and you say, hey, let's put funding into this. We'll give you more money, and you guys can be the organizing force. because it's so important for California and for our economy that we actually weigh in on these bills rather than letting them die and wither. That's another option. If you can't afford any of this, and this is where I want to end, and I want to go fast so we can get to the panel and Q&As. What we can do is, I am happy if you email us or if you follow up, jkudon@orrick.com, and I think it's somewhere on this. If you want to email me, I can provide you, or my team will provide you with the email addresses of the Senate President, the Speaker, the Governor's office, and their chiefs of staff. And you can write a letter saying, here's what we think should happen. Here's the right way to do regulation or no regulation. Here's why you shouldn't do it. And if you get that letter in, maybe in the next 2 months, that's early enough to at least have it on someone's radar. I'm not going to promise that they'll read it. I'm not going to promise they'll act on it, but it is better than doing nothing. So if it's a choice of, hey, I can just sit there and track, or I can actually weigh in, you may actually get a call, because a lot of times they're looking for experts on issues like this. And that might not hear, of course, we have plenty of experts, but when you get to a state like Iowa, or you get to Florida even, they won't have the experts. They'll literally just go to this email and say, you know what, I got an email from this person in California who said that this is what we should do. Let me just reach out to them. It's literally, it happens enough. So that is the kind of do-it-yourself approach. I strongly recommend it. This is very important to you, to do the approach where you hire the lobbyists and you engage throughout the process. That's what I do. That's where I come in. But I did want to give that option because I know how important this is to everybody. So that is my presentation on AI and where we think it's going and how you can get involved. What I thought, I know